fill in. We could make this sort of conversational. My name is Josh Hankus. I'm the executive director for the Routt County Wildfire Mitigation Council, and our mission is to create resilient fire-adapted communities here in Routt County. I report to a board of directors that includes at least one person in this room. They're represented by these sort of agencies and organizations up top. And then we also receive support from all these agencies and organizations down below, and probably a few others that I'm forgetting. Tonight, this event is sponsored by Altitude Realtors. They've taken over for the Steamboat Springs Board of Realtors, and they're more regional, so they cover Summit County, Graham County, Jackson County, and Routt County. I believe that's it for them, but they've given us some considerable funding that helps us with food and drinks for events like this, and we host a big conference in the spring for all the stakeholders and public land managers, and we get everybody together to talk about what they're working on and where they're thinking about working. And it's just an opportunity for folks to get together and learn from others' experiences and successes and challenges, and maybe combine forces when it makes sense. If State Forest Service is thinking about a project here and it butts up against BLM land, it's like that connection could get made and that project could become bigger and more robust. So that's sort of the idea behind the council and what we do. So that's one component of it, is kind of this sort of hub for mitigation activity here in Routt County. And then the other is some cool initiatives like working with the Wildfire Research Center to do studies throughout the county, which we have just concluded. And that's kind of the primary reason that we're convening here tonight. But we do all kinds of education and outreach. We help HOAs and smaller neighborhoods pursue like a FireWise recognition, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. We do home ignition zone evaluations, which are one-on-one meetings with homeowners to help them understand kind of the positive attributes of their structures and vegetation, and then some areas that they might want to focus in a little bit. So those are kind of the main high point things that we do. Tonight, we are in the presence of Josh Keene with the Wildfire Research Center, or WiRē as they go by. They are a nonprofit organization, not unlike our own, but they take kind of a social science approach to understanding risk and kind of attitude in a specific plan area. And I will not steal your thunder, Josh, but what I'll tell you is that we're incredibly lucky to have been able to partner with them. They're an excellent organization, very highly regarded. I think it was November of 24, October. I was able to ride their coattails on a governor's award for high impact research that they were presented with in Denver. So just a ton of great work and very insightful. And so for us to have been able to link up with them and fit into their schedule and fit in at a time when we have the capacity and the funding to do our part in this effort, it has been great. And it's been 2 exciting years of doing all this, and I'm thrilled with the results. And there's some really interesting stuff I think that you'll learn tonight. So I will not take up too much more oxygen here, and I will just turn it over to Josh. So thank you all for coming. And we are recording this, so if you've got HOA leadership from Heritage Park, Silver Spur, or you've got your own HOA leadership outside of those neighborhoods that you would like to kind of benefit from some of this, these recordings will be available on our website within a week or 2, most likely. So thanks, everybody. Josh?
Yeah, thank you. Not necessary, but I appreciate it. So yeah, my name is Josh Keene. I'm the Wildfire Mitigation Specialist with the Wildfire Research Center, or WiRē. What I will say, like Josh alluded to it, I am just one member of like a really high-powered team of like pretty intellectual folks that allow these projects to take place. I just happen to be the one member of our team who had the ability to be up here in Routt County this week, so you're stuck with me. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. My first summer up here in Colorado was spent on a Rocky Mountain Youth Corps crew, doing work all over this part of the state. And so it feels like somewhat of a full circle moment to like be back here presenting these results to this place that I hold really dearly in my heart. But yeah, so like Josh mentioned, we did 3 projects throughout Routt County, one up in North Routt, one in West Steamboat, and one down in Stagecoach. And so going to focus on the results of what we learned by implementing what we call the WiRē approach in those 3 neighborhoods that comprise West Steamboat. And for folks, I imagine there's probably folks in the room who either don't live in those neighborhoods or might be pretty unfamiliar with the work that we do. So I'll start pretty like high level and just kind of give like an overview of like how we do our projects. We've done a bunch of these all throughout the Western United States, and it's a fairly standardized approach that we implement in all of these places, such that we can glean individual results for a given project, but also allows us, because it's a replicated systematic approach, all of the data that we collect from each individual project gets put into this compiled data set that those really smart intellectual research members of our team then use to like glean sort of higher level insights about wildfire risk and preparedness and that kind of thing. So anyway, step 1 of the WiRē approach is just introducing everybody within our defined study area that like this project is going to happen, right? We're taking a social science approach, and part of that is requires us getting responses from homeowners. And so what we found is that if I say we send, but really our partners, in this case, Josh and his crew, send an initial letter to all of the residents within our defined study area, just saying, hey, we're going to do this thing. You're likely going to see a fire truck driving slowly through your neighborhood, kind of peering at your property, taking a risk assessment. You're going to get a household survey. Please respond to that, and eventually you'll hear back from us about it. And then we get into like the actual data collection portion of the approach. The first portion of that is risk assessment data collection. We train our partners, staff on behalf of our partners to conduct rapid wildfire risk assessments. For those of you who are familiar, it's like pretty akin to like a structure triage assessment that would occur when an event is taking place. So kind of a quick look. I'll dive into it in more depth in a little bit, but quick look at like, hey, what is the structure made out of? What does the vegetation immediately surrounding the structure look like? So that we can get an idea of, vulnerabilities in terms of ignition and potential like wildfire behavior around the home. And then the next piece of our data collection is the household survey administration. If any of you live in these neighborhoods and got one, you know that it's a pretty robust survey. It's like 16 pages long. Usually takes people like 45 minutes or an hour to complete, which is why that initial letter sent on behalf of our partners is so important, right? It's not just like some third-party research entity from the Front Range, trying to do something. It's a local entity, and what that does is typically garners us like pretty high response rates related as compared to typical survey methodologies. And then the last step of our approach is what we're doing today, right? Like we pair that data together, the risk assessment and the household survey data, and we try and pull out some important pieces and some narratives that kind of reveal themselves when we evaluate the data, and we share back, and with the intent of helping our partners tweak their programs such that they can be more impactful for the constituents that they serve. So that's like at a really high level, kind of like how we do things in each of our projects. So what I'll do next is just kind of like a real high level overview of the household survey, because that will be what I'll focus on for the next little bit. But these are some of the kind of topics of questions that are asked in that survey. We want to know about people's direct experience with wildfire. Obviously, that informs like how folks think about mitigating and preparing for evacuation and things of that nature. One of the other key pieces that I'll highlight, I won't talk about all of these, is the self-assessment. So that first piece that I talked about is we send trained assessors or wildfire professionals out to conduct a risk assessment on every residential parcel within our defined study area. And then we ask the household survey respondents to respond to those same attributes that the professional or trained assessor was looking at, and then rate their overall parcel risk rating from their perspective. And that way we get like a one-to-one comparison. Hey, this is what a trained professional thinks about the wildfire risk to your parcel, and this is what the homeowner thinks about the risk to their parcel, which is a really great baseline, because like how can we expect people to be conducting mitigation activities or preparing for evacuation if at like a really basic level they don't think that their parcel is at risk. And then, yeah, I won't go through all of these, but these are some of the topics that we ask about in that household survey. Here's like a real high-level summary of what we did in West Steamboat. So there were 410 risk assessments completed between these three neighborhoods, and 130 household surveys were returned for a 32% response rate, which is pretty good in terms of like social science generally. It's actually kind of low. Our average response rate is between 40 and 42%, which is interesting. And there might be some insights that could be gleaned about why that happened in this place, but I won't dive too far into that. One item that I should touch on here is we do conduct a comparison between the overall risk ratings from the rapid risk assessments between the parcels from which we had household surveys returned and the parcels from which we did not have household surveys returned, because there can be some assumptions that could be made, right? Like one could think, only the folks who are at really high risk are going to be concerned and the ones returning the survey. What we found, though, is that there is no difference between risk between survey respondents and non-survey respondents. So for whatever that is worth. So yeah, I'll start diving into what we actually learned. And we'll start with just like a bit of kind of demographic information, because I think that helps set the stage a little bit. Like in most surveys, we collect some demographic stuff, right? Age, gender, education, employment, income. I think the only really intriguing piece here for West Steamboat is that of the three study areas in Routt County, this was the only one that had a pretty even split between males and females returning the household survey, which is what we normally find, but for whatever reason, that was not the case up in North Routt or Stagecoach, but it was here. I don't have much to say about that, but I think that's probably the interesting point here. Moving on, we have some information about respondents' homeownership and residence characteristics. As I imagine is not any surprise to any of you who are familiar with this place. The vast majority of respondents own their home as their primary residence, and very few respondents report renting their home out. I'm not terribly familiar with those neighborhoods, but I did a tour through them, and I think that makes sense just based on like an observational sort of view at that place. The average year the home was built was in 1991. There is some difference between the significant difference between the age of the homes within the communities, but this is the average between the three. What 33-year-old homes tell me is that sort of standard asphalt shingle roofs are probably nearing their lifespan. Something to think about. Yeah, won't dive too much into there. And then we also asked some questions about seasonality, and 96% of the respondents live in their home full-time. And there really isn't any seasonality that exists between those part-time residents, which is the really small teal top of the bars that you're seeing, in many places we see like really clear seasonality between May and September. That was the case up in North Routt. That doesn't apply here in West Steamboat though. And so we'll dive into some of the data that we collected related to like respondents' direct experience with wildfire. We think that that's a really great sort of jumping off spot for thinking about how and why folks might be behaving in a certain way on their parcels. And what we found was that there's very little direct experience with wildfire among the respondents out in West Steamboat. I imagine this is probably one or maybe two respondents who are answering this question in the same way throughout. But yeah, very little direct experience having evacuated or homes being damaged or anything of that nature. We also ask folks about the closest distance that a wildfire has been to their West Steamboat home. And most respondents report that the nearest fire was more than 10 miles away. The remaining respondents are reporting the nearest fire either being 2 to 10 miles away or they're just not sure. Again, it's just another data point that shows us that the respondent base just has very little direct experience with wildfire, shaping how they're thinking about treating their properties. We also ask a handful of questions about perceptions, both related to wildfire risk, but I think that helps sort of shape the context of how people are thinking about this topic. And the first of these perception, it's a weird box that probably shouldn't be there, but anyway, the first of these weird risk perception questions that we ask is really straightforward. We provide a statement. My property is at risk to wildfire with these response options ranging from strongly agree to strongly disagree. 37% strongly agree or agree with that statement. About a quarter agree, neither agree or disagree. We essentially interpret this as like, I'm not sure. And then another 37% disagree or strongly disagree. These are pretty fascinating results to me, right? Like there are equal numbers of folks who agree and disagree with this really basic statement about wildfire risk to their properties living in these neighborhoods. That's like really intriguing at a high level. So we also ask about factors that contribute to the chances of wildfire damaging their property in the next 12 months. And the scale, you can see it up top. The response options are a lot, somewhat, or not at all, going from the bottom up. And most respondents for each potential factor fall into the somewhat category, which in this context we sort of interpret as like it depends. And I think this makes a lot of sense, right? Like wildfires are dynamic. It's impossible to predict whether or not one will occur nearby a given property in the next year. And structure protection or structure damage is really context specific. However, I think the a lot responses here at the bottom are kind of intriguing and are different from what we found anywhere else in our Routt County studies. Typically, what we find are that survey respondents are pretty dramatically underestimating the effect that the physical characteristics of their home and the vegetation surrounding their home will play during a wildfire, and are overestimating the effect that the vegetation on neighbors' properties or nearby public lands will have. You can read into that however you'd like, but here, for whatever reason, that trend is less apparent, which is just like sort of intriguing to me. West Steamboat is a bit of an anomaly. It sort of breaks many of the rules that we've learned from doing these projects over and over again. So I'll keep digging in. We also ask if there's a wildfire on your property, how likely are these following outcomes? I won't read them to you. I assume that you could. The text is probably big enough to read, but the dark blue bars represent very or extremely likely responses, and the light blue bars represent moderately likely responses. And what we see here is that respondents seem to have a general understanding of the potential outcomes of wildfires on their properties. Over half think that it's very or extremely likely that their home would have some smoke or physical damage, and that trees and landscape would burn. However, we then see a pretty serious drop-off, with fewer respondents thinking that it's likely that their neighbors' homes would be damaged, or even further, that their own home would be destroyed. Again, I won't go too deep into like interpreting these results. I'd just like to point out, like as an outsider, sort of viewing all of this information as objectively as I can. When I look at the map of these neighborhoods, what I see are relatively small parcels with fairly dense housing development. And if I put my old like firefighter hat on, those two factors combine for what I think could be potentially difficult structure protection. And so, yeah, those results are, again, just sort of interesting to me. And then the last bit here on these sort of wildfire perceptions, kind of relatedly, we ask a handful of questions about the perceptions of fire department capacity. This is really important, right? Because we know that resource availability to respond to these wildfires will always face constraints, whether it be just like a matter of fact that the department has limited resources, or there's a fire going on 2 states away and all of the local resources are helping out on that fire, right? Like, it is inevitable during the summer, wildfire fighting resources will be constrained. And it's notable that it seems like the survey respondents kind of seem to recognize those constraints. Only 15% agree or strongly agree that the local firefighters have sufficient resources to protect threatened homes. Only 24% agree or strongly agree that the fire department would save their home if a fire was on their property. Survey respondents seem to understand the role of doing mitigation on private property and how that relates to firefighter safety. Nearly all of the respondents agree or strongly agree that reducing wildfire risk on their property improves firefighting safety. So with that in mind, we move on to some evacuation related stuff. One of the most important aspects of I think effective and efficient wildfire response is getting residents evacuated out of their homes when the thing is happening. And when an evacuation notice is ordered and it goes smoothly, it allows residents or responders to focus on the task at hand, which is fighting the fire and protecting structures. And so we ask questions to sort of garner a better understanding of the evacuation preparedness amongst the survey respondents. And what we found, I think, for me, raises some maybe yellow flags, maybe orange. But we found that the minority of respondents claim to have an evacuation plan for the people in their household. And we found that 42% of the respondents who have pets have an evacuation plan for them. That's a really critical one, right? Like every single year, chaos ensues on a wildfire event somewhere in the West because somebody's going back into an evacuation zone to get their pets out. It's like nightmare scenario stuff. We also found that just a slight majority of folks strongly agree with the statement, I will receive an evacuation order with enough time to evacuate. Interesting. Yeah, again, you can read into that however you like. I think these high-level results are intriguing, but we'll dig a bit deeper into the pieces that actually comprise an effective sort of evacuation preparedness plan. The first of these is about like notification. I should point out how this is laid out. So on the column on your left is essentially the respondent saying, yes, I've completed this action. And then the column on the right is the respondent saying, I want more information about this thing. And we find that roughly 2/3 of the respondents have opted into an emergency notification system, and have identified how they will be notified of an evacuation. And similar percentages of folks want more information about that stuff. And this slide is set up in the exact same way. The next one will be too, but this is focused on questions related to kind of where folks will evacuate during a wildfire event. We found the majority of respondents have identified safe evacuation routes, but fewer people have identified where they will evacuate to and where they will stay long-term. Both obviously really important pieces of an effective evacuation plan. And we also learned that generally most folks would like to learn more information about these pieces as well. And then finally, we ask about these other critical steps in evacuation planning. And again, these are the things that, as I see it, actually comprise an evacuation plan, right? So it's one thing to say I have a plan, but it's an entirely different thing to actually do the steps that comprise that plan. And we see that there's a real drop-off here. And that few people in West Steamboat have completed these other critical steps. However, what I find encouraging is that the majority of respondents desire more information about it. And what's fortunate is that this is not super complex stuff, right? Like these resources are available widely. There are, sort of standard checklists that exist, right? Like this isn't difficult information to understand or provide. So there's opportunities there, as I see it. All right, so I'll jump into the data that we've collected kind of throughout the project related to wildfire mitigation. And this data I like to present sort of a method to kind of myth bust common narratives that are often shared about WUI residents, right? Like amongst foresters and firefighters and that sort of thing. There are these common narratives that exist, right? Like, oh, the people who live in the WUI, they don't get it. They don't understand that wildfire is a thing that ought to exist on the landscape, and it's an important piece of the ecosystem, and that's why we can't reach them. Or they think that that the Forest Service nearby is just super dense, and whatever they do on their properties isn't going to matter. One that we hear all the time is that, oh, folks live in the WUI because they love their trees, and they're never going to cut their trees, right? But what we learned from the data is that none of those common narratives apply here in West Steamboat, right? Like you've got a population of people who, as I interpret this data, are generally receptive to these concepts. And so here, what we see are the number of respondents who are saying yes to participating in these various activities on their own properties. I'll point out, obviously, right, like it's a significant number of people who are reporting regularly mowing and raking debris near their homes. And obviously that will have some benefit. But the remainder of these items are lower than what we saw in our other Routt County study areas. Some of them fairly significantly so. And I think this likely aligns with one of those data points that I showed earlier, right? There was real disparity amongst the respondents related to their just kind of overall sentiment about being at risk to wildfire. And I think that is kind of revealing itself here, right? If you don't think that you're at risk of wildfire, why would you be conducting wildfire mitigation activities on your property? So I'll move on. So this is similar, right? Percent reporting yes to or participating in these actions, but beyond their property. These are also the lowest numbers reported among our various Routt County study areas. I think there's an understandable drop off here though, right? Like naturally folks are going to focus on their own properties. But on the flip side, we also know that community wildfire adaptation simply cannot be achieved if folks are just operating in silos, right? Like this work kind of demands community level action. I don't know that I have much else to say on this piece. The other thing that I will say here, it's a bit of an aside, I suppose now, but I meant to say it at the top, is that I nerd out on like community wildfire adaptation and what's going on in the parcels, but I should note that this is just like one piece of the pie, right? Like there are many other things that have to go on along with individuals doing work on their own properties and in their own communities, fuel treatments nearby, those sorts of things, emergency management planning, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, obviously this is the work that we do, so we're honed in on this kind of parcel level community risk stuff. I digress. The last piece here in this sort of section that I'll show is we provide a list of potential incentives that folks can either opt into or opt out of that would potentially motivate them to do this work. And the majority of folks identified either resource incentives or information incentives as those that would help them take action. You can see the one that sort of rises to the top is a report describing their property's wildfire risk. But other significant ones here are, one-on-one site visits, help doing the work, a neighborhood group that organizes wildfire risk reduction activities, feedback on the work that they've done, right? The reason why I am actually honing in on all of these are like the common things that sort of make up a wildfire mitigation program. And these are also the things that the Mitigation Council provides, right? So I think there's some alignment here going on. There's desire for the exact programs that are available to the people who live in these neighborhoods. So that's obviously pretty encouraging. I won't keep talking at you for too long. This is the kind of last section. But what we'll do here is at the top, I alluded to the fact that in the household survey, we ask respondents to rate their own properties, right? They go through attribute by attribute alongside the risk assessment that was conducted by the trained professionals. And we'll look at that risk comparison. But real quick, before I dive into that, this is just like a high level summary of the risk assessment that was conducted by those trained folks. It's comprised of 13 attributes. It's the same risk assessment we do all over the place. It's based on contemporary wildfire science and is vetted ever so frequently. But yeah, there are a handful of attributes that give us some information about the structure itself, right? Like what is it built out of? How receptive is it going to be to embers and heat and things of that nature? A couple of attributes about the work that is being done immediately surrounding the home as it relates to vegetation management and other combustibles being nearby. A few attributes on background conditions. So that's a bit zoomed out from defensible space, right? Like now in the background conditions, we're thinking about, okay, as I'm evaluating this home, what are the background conditions that are going to influence wildfire behavior as it approaches this home that I'm assessing? And then a handful of attributes on access, right, for evacuation and getting responders in. And then, so the trained folks go out and collect all that data, and then we get the raw data, and then these percentages that you see represent the weights that we assign to each of these attributes, such that we can give a point total for each of those attributes, and then eventually an overall risk score for each individual parcel. And again, yeah.
Roof is the number one.
It is.
Roof material?
Absolutely. Yep. Like, excuse me, for example, yeah, if you have like a wood shake shingle roof, that's sort of a nightmare scenario, right? Because however big your house is, it's that square footage of combustible material that's just like receiving ember, like a shower of embers during an event. Asphalt shingles are great, yeah. Okay. That would be considered like Class A. Class A roofing is sort of the industry standard. Yep. Ideally, an asphalt shingle roof that's still in good shape, right? Like I was mentioning at the beginning. Once they start aging and shingles start peeling or falling off, right? Exactly. Getting into the weeds a little bit, but yeah. Anyway, this is the risk assessment that was conducted by the trained folks, and then you can see a map of what that overall risk rating looks like once we, put them on the parcels. But then on the left is the household survey responses, right? So the folks doing the survey, they go attribute by attribute, but then obviously we don't like create a risk score for their responses. After they move through those 13 attributes, they are then just asked, okay, rate your own property based on what you just responded to. And this is what that looks like graphically. So the risk assessment conducted by the trained professionals is on the left-hand side, and then the self-assessment by the household survey respondents is on the right-hand side. What we
Go back to the slide. That's when I think some of us live there, and we want to see our house. So are you saying this is what the professionals thought?
Yes, ma'am.
Just only the professionals?
Yes.
So would you be able to look at one extreme one and say, come on?
I can't just looking at the map. I'd have to look at the data and evaluate like which attributes are driving an extreme risk parcel. But you know, you can think about it with these attributes, right? Like most extremely rated homes are going to have maybe not combustible roof. That's pretty uncommon, but they're going to have combustible siding, combustible attachments. They're going to be close to nearby homes. They're going to have poor defensible space, right? Like all of those sort of things.
And that was a 60-second assessment that you guys did on Routt, correct?
Roughly 60. They usually take between 1 and 3 minutes. Yep. But what's great about the West Steamboat communities are that you can see pretty much everything. In many of our study areas, there's long driveways and dense forest, and you can't actually see everything that's going on. But in West Steamboat, everything's pretty on view for folks to look at. Yeah.
And were these extreme homes being notified?
No, ma'am, not directly. Yeah, no direct outreach to those extreme homes. Okay, so I think that like these high level results are insightful, but I think more kind of nuanced narratives reveal themselves when we look at some of the specific attributes. And I won't bore you by looking at all 13, but we'll look at a few key results. So this first one that I'll point out is the attribute that was collected by the trained folks as just siding. This isn't a comparison. This is just the results from the risk assessment. What we found were that 93% of the homes in West Steamboat have some sort of combustible siding, so either log or heavy timbers or wood or vinyl siding. Not, probably not surprising to anybody in the room, right? But it kind of sets the stage for some other stuff. The next attribute we'll look at are combustible attachments. Similar results. 97% of the homes in West Steamboat were found to have combustible attachments. These are decks, fences, porches, balconies, right? Like the things that really commonly catch embers and then ignite homes or transmit surface fire near a home to the home itself. And then this next one that I'll look at is distance to adjacent homes. And every home, again, I'm guessing this is not a surprise to anybody, but every home in West Steamboat, as evaluated by those trained assessors, is either 10 to 30 feet away from the next nearby home or 30 to 100 feet away from the next nearby home. What this means is that there's essentially potential for structure-to-structure conflagration, right? Yeah. So those sorts of things all in combination with each other, kind of raise a yellow flag. It's not unique, right? Like these kinds of situations exist all over the place. But what I think is interesting is when we add in this sort of the defensible space piece. So what we're looking at here is a combination of two risk assessment attributes, distance to overgrown, dense, unmaintained vegetation, and distance to other non-vegetative combustibles, right? Things like construction material, abandoned RVs, firewood, flammable patio furniture, things like that. We consider, so that would have been collected here in attachments, and we do consider Trex decks a combustible attachment. They are far less vulnerable than a wood deck, but they can still ignite. They can melt given the right conditions. They're not truly non-combustible like a concrete patio would be, something like that. So what we're seeing here are the percentage of homes in these communities that have neither overgrown, dense, or unmaintained vegetation or other combustible items within 5 feet of the house. And from the risk assessment, we found that 39% of the properties in West Steamboat meet those criteria. So they have proper defensible space within that first 5 feet. However, survey respondents, 73% of survey respondents report having those conditions on their properties. So clearly, right, there's just a bit of a disconnect going on between what a trained sort of like assessor who has that lens to look at these things at evaluated as it relates to defensible space and how the residents of these communities think about their own defensible space. And then this is the same exact data, but now we're zoomed out, right? So now we're looking at the second zone of defensible space, so out to 30 feet. Same thing, right? The percentage of homes who have neither overgrown, dense, or unmaintained vegetation or other combustibles. And we found that none of the homes in West Steamboat meet those criteria out to 30 feet. And again, we see a gap, right? It's not as significant, but a quarter of the respondents think that they meet those criteria. And if we hearken back a few slides, right, we remember that while it was less than the other communities in Routt County, folks were reporting at relatively high rates, conducting, commonly recommended mitigation activities on their properties. And again, I think that to me, it just provides an opportunity, right, to just sort of align lenses a little bit between, what responders or foresters or that sort of thing think about what's going on here and what the residents of these places think about what's going on. But these conditions combined with what we were looking at here, I think raise red flags for me, right? Like really kind of poor defensible space combined with homes being pretty close to each other and having a lot of combustible attachments that are attached to combustible siding, right? Like if I put my old firefighter hat on again, like my situational awareness bug is kind of jittering. But then this is the last piece. I'll share this. It's a bit tangential to that topic that I was talking about, but I think it provides a real sort of low-hanging fruit opportunity. So one of the questions, or one of the attributes in the risk assessment is address posting. Address posting obviously is really critical for wildfire response, right? Like there's going to be sheriffs assigned to addresses to get people out during an evacuation. There's going to be structure protection crews that are assigned like certain parts of neighborhoods to go protect structures. Oftentimes the structure protection crews aren't local firefighters, right? Like it could be a Forest Service engine from Idaho or something. But obviously proper address postage has is really important for things beyond wildfire, right? Just for like general emergency response. I think these are really intriguing, right? Like far more survey respondents are self-reporting that their address sign is not posted or visible at all than the trained assessors did. It's quite intriguing, but like that's sort of aside from the point. The bottom line is that there's alignment in the fact that almost none of the address postings in West Steamboat meet local standards. And like local standard, they have them on the table when you walked in, right? Like the standards for like a proper address sign from a response standpoint of those like non-combustible reflective signs. And there's an opportunity here, right? Like that's low-hanging fruit from a mitigation and preparedness standpoint. They're relatively inexpensive. They're relatively easy to install. And I consider adopting proper address signage as like a gateway action into mitigation, right? Like oftentimes I think that if you can convince somebody to put up a proper address sign, you can probably convince them to clear their gutters a few times a year, or trim the branches of the junipers, or remove the spruce that's growing inside their deck, or whatever the case may be. So I just wanted to end with that because I think that it kind of provides an opportunity that is certainly achievable to get things moving in the right direction. But I've been talking at you for a while now, so I will shut up for a moment, let y'all digest. if there are any questions, I'm happy to field them. Yeah, if not.